Well, tonight, New Jersey governor's got a problem. No, not the political variety, the pension variety. Today, the governor delivering his budget address saying he's got a plan that will save the state billions of dollars in retirement and health care costs, but it could also cut benefits for thousands of workers across New Jersey. Is the plan all that Christie says it is, and will it be the cure for what ails the state and maybe even the governor? And former New York State Assembly Speaker Shelley Silver, he is arraigned on federal corruption charges. Why his attorney says Silver won't be able to get a fair trial. Plus, Monday, you sounded off on the issue of American exceptionalism, all in the backdrop of what Rudy Giuliani had to say about the president. And we got a lot of interesting comments from you. Tonight, we're going to open up the mailbag and tell the audience what some of you had to say. Good evening and welcome to RFL, everyone. I'm Richard French. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And we will start in New Jersey, where Governor Christie, he's laying out a new plan to confront the state's pension problem. Now, Christie's address, it comes just a day after a Mercer County judge ruled that the governor broke the law by not making full state pension payments here for the Public Employees Union from 2011 through today. Now, today, Fios One was all over the story. Kimberly Wallace, in fact, she joins us live from the State House in Trenton with the very latest on the governor's plan and some of the reaction. Kimberly?
That's right, Rich. $33.8 billion. That's how much the governor proposed to spend in his fiscal year 2016 budget address from this podium inside the Assembly chambers here. But it was his pension and health benefit reform announcement that caught everyone's attention.
The roadmap calls for the existing pension plan to be frozen and to be replaced by a new plan. Both the existing plan and the new plan would be transferred from state ownership to a trust overseen by the NJEA.
The proposal put forth by a nonpartisan commission is being called the Roadmap for Reform.
The roadmap also requires that the state make periodic contributions each fiscal year to the trust to pay off the unfunded liability of the existing plan over a period of 40 years. To ensure the state meets this obligation and the payment is enforced, a constitutional amendment would be voted on this November.
But Democrats remain wary after a judge ruled Monday Christie violated the law when he did not fund the system last year following a 2011 bipartisan agreement to fix the underfunded system facing bankruptcy.
By not making those payments, he is making the very mistakes that he accused other governors of doing and took credit for making payments. I don't think there's any creditor in the world that will come to you and thank you for making a part of your mortgage payment.
This speech was not really a budget speech. It turned into a pension reform speech about the health benefits, that we actually have asked all these employees to pay more into their health benefits throughout. They're paying more than they ever did. Now you're going to try and change the game.
And Democrats from this side of the aisle also criticized Christie for not addressing funding for other key issues, including the Transportation Trust Fund. That's the latest for RFL. Live from Trenton, Kimberly Wallace. Rich?
Thank you very much, Kimberly. And the New Jersey Education Association says the governor overstated their partnership when he mentioned it in the address, that there was a deal of sorts on the table. Well, today, Christie said he reached an unprecedented accord with the NJEA. Group said politics trump policy in his address. But earlier today, I spoke with the Assemblyman Majority Leader Louis Greenwald about the pension plan. Here's some of what he had to say. First off, did the judge get it right yesterday when she said that the governor, in effect, broke the law, that 2011 agreement, by shorting the pension fund $1.6 billion?
I haven't had a chance to read the opinion, so I'm not exactly sure what the judge said. Here's what I would tell you. What the judge did in my mind, and my understanding is to say to the governor that we need to follow a law that he asked for, that we negotiated in a bipartisan way, and that he ultimately signed. She hasn't asked him to do anything outside of the extraordinary other than literally follow the law that he asked for and that he trumpeted across the country as a sense of bipartisan success, as a part of the reason why he should be elected President of the United States.
Well, today I listened to the governor, and he talks about the roadmap for reform. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but he said, hey, I worked it out with the NJEA. We got a deal basically here in principle. We know how to manage our own math. You said, and I heard a few minutes ago, you heard some hypocrisy from the governor. Explain to the audience how big the gap really is here and how much of what the governor said coincides with, you believe, reality versus the rhetoric?
I think there are components of the proposal that I can speak for myself and I support. For instance, clearly we need a constitutionally dedicated fund. If past history has shown anything, we have not lived up to our commitment to make those payments. Most recently, the bill passed and signed by Governor Christie and his failure to make those payments over the last 2 years. I also think the proposal recommended by the union leadership, so for part of the unions who want to take over control of their own pension and benefits and control the investment of those, is no different than my wife and I want to do for our family. I want to control my own investments for my own retirement, and I think what some of the union leaders have learned is we are the worst people to be in charge of controlling the pensions, because you have changeover in leadership every 2 and 4 years. We should not be in the pension business. They should be in the pension business and control of their own retirements for their own workers. From the Speaker's perspective and mine, as well as Senate leadership, there are still some unanswered questions. We want to know what the impact is on that mid-career level individual, so the person who's been in the union for 15 years. If you're in your first year, you have an opportunity to recover and make investments and control your retirement. If you're in the 25th or 30th year of your career, your retirement is set based on this roadmap. But the devil's in the details in those mid-level career people.
The governor made it pretty clear. He said there'll be no more taxes. You already had a shortfall going into what we learned from the judge yesterday as it relates to pension liabilities. You guys were $2 billion short as it related to the budget already. So if there's no more taxes and no new revenue, what kind of cuts would you guys be talking about to make the pot right?
Well, you know, again, our process is a constitutionally dedicated process where the governor will introduce a budget. He spoke about it today. We did not see any of the details. That will be forthcoming. The sooner we have those details in our hands, the better positioned we will be to answer that question. You know, to say that there are no new taxes, you know, it's a soundbite that for the vast majority of the public that really does not have the time or the inclination to look at the details of a budget, it sounds good. But the truth of the matter is there have been tax increases in the past, and as sure as I'm sitting here, I bet there are tax increases in this budget.
And finally, you said there was a lot of words. Well, one phrase we didn't hear at all was the Transportation Trust Fund. And you just had the Federal Highway Administration put out a report. Jersey's got the 6th worst bridges in the country. And given how significant transportation is to the state in terms of revenue and as a corridor here from all up and down the East Coast, where's that going to come from, and is the money still there? I spoke to a lot of guys that a lot of people thought there'd be a gas tax and would go towards this. Would that still be the plan?
Well, you know, unfortunately, again, you hear the governor, you know, really, I don't know how else to say other than spewing political rhetoric. There have been strong conversations about the need to fund the Transportation Trust Fund. The Republican failure of their entire party to lead on this issue is why you see absolutely zero mention of it today. But it is critically important. It is unfortunate that I think we are getting to a point where we may have to subpoena records under oath of public work offices, county by county, and have information available to us as the true condition of roads and bridges in this state. There is going to be a calamity that has to get addressed.
Assembly Majority Leader Lou Greenwald, thank you so much for a few. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right, let's bring our panel right now. Scott Levinson, president of the Advance Group. Dominic Carter, journalist and also author. Scott Vanderhoff, attorney, former Rockland County executive, and Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent. We'll get into the politics of this in a little bit, but just on the pension front, this isn't just New Jersey's problem. Every state is dealing with some of the realities here of some of these costs. To my end, this is probably the biggest challenge is that any governor has to really manage here right now, because they have agreements in place here, but if they're going to fund them completely, something else has got to give, and nobody wants to raise any taxes to bring in the revenue to make, as I said, the pot right. This isn't just a Jersey problem. This is national, right?
Well, it is, and it's a corporate problem, too. I mean, corporations are suffering the same kind of issue, primarily because people are living longer, and therefore those pensions, which in New York's case, for example, is a defined benefit pension, which really costs a lot. So when the market doesn't do well, the state's got to kick in more money, and people literally across the country, those kinds of old-fashioned pensions are really driving taxes up, and so it's not a New Jersey problem. However, having said that, there's an obligation of a government to fund them.
Yeah.
I mean, and in this case, there was a legal requirement that he be funded. So to fund less than 50%, I think is disingenuous of the governor, aside from being
And to that end, Andrew, I mean, yes, he's right. You can go back, whether it's Corzine, McGreevey, Whitman, every predecessor. Florio was the only one who at least was upfront about it, I think, in terms of Jersey governors. They all played a Ponzi game here in terms of actually making it right. But in 2011, he reached a deal on this. And then before the ink was even dry, he said, never mind. The judge said he broke the law. I mean, you don't get much stronger than that.
The law that he passed and that he got the legislature to sign off on. I mean, yes, New Jersey has a particular history when it comes to this. It's been one of the worst states when it comes to funding its pension system over the years. And so I suppose the proposal to give, $1.5 billion into the fund deserves some minor measure of congratulations. It's still well short of where it needs to be. And the idea of trying to make up for this over 40 years, I mean, mortgages don't go 40 years. I mean, who thinks they're going to get anything out of the pension system really thinks it's going to be anywhere close to fully funded, or will live long enough to see it fully funded 40 years down the road?
Dominic, usually these budget addresses are boring, okay? But in the backdrop of what the judge said yesterday, it's not like New York, which is more than $100 billion from the budget. Jersey's got a budget, less than $40 billion. They were $2 billion short before yesterday happened, and then the judge said, "Oh yeah, by the way, find another $1.6 billion and do it all before June 30th." If they don't find a way to bring in some more revenues, i.e., taxes, and the governor said flat out he's not going to do it, there could be some really painful cuts. You got a lot of communities in Jersey that are relying on Trenton funding from the Camdens, the Newarks on down here. I heard people saying this stuff could be draconian.
No doubt about it. That's a tactic that mayors and governors use when they don't get their way in terms of what they want. They scare people to death in terms of proposed budget cuts. And in all likelihood, that's what when the governor says no on taxes and you don't have a windfall coming in from Wall Street, where's this money going to come from? It really is that simple. And so that means there are going to be a lot of cuts, and the governor is going to scare a lot of people with his plan to get this deal together.
What's interesting, though, Scott, the NJEA, now they backed off a little bit, but they seemed to agree that they had the framework of a deal in place that the governor was ready to live by, where they were going to even swallow some additional concessions from even the 2011 agreement.
And the fact is, as Scott points out, this is a true violation of the public trust. And that's the real problem here. As time goes on, it is a national crisis. It is something that has to be dealt with. But the governor has responsibility here. So for him to start out framing the issue as, I won't raise taxes, is what gets you into the problem in the first place. He can't just close his eyes to the real issue he has facing him. Same thing with the transportation issue.
Isn't it a dirty secret here, though? You got rid. I mean, you can't. You heard what he said. He's got ready to subpoena local folks to just say how bad the roads are, okay, and how bad the highways are, and how bad the bridges are. That things could collapse. They don't have the money for that. They don't have the money to make the budget right, and now they can't pay the pension fund. There's a cumulative effect here that how much is labor saying, you know what, I gave already in 2011 versus we got to consider.
But this is by definition moving the finish line. You know, forget the hypocrisy and cynicism, which Scott points out, but he's changing the game in midstream. He got the concessions. He didn't just get the concessions. He then went on a national parade about what a great deal he's done and how he stood up to the public sector unions. You got to keep your side of the deal.
And how it works across party lines.
We're talking about a state that's had 6 credit rating downgrades in recent years under Chris Christie. At some point, the math doesn't add up, and it's something like a broken record. We're seeing it in Kansas, where the governor there just refuses to essentially slash taxes and is slashing spending in the states in a tailspin. And we're back to the same old thing. At some point, taxes have to work their way into it.
Well, I'm sorry for interrupting, but there's this other piece here, which the public sector is not private sector. People go into public sector, into civil service work, with a kind of understanding they're not going to get rich. With that comes a certain trust that government's going to meet their obligations. That's the huge problem here. It's not the same as the private sector.
And I would look at the political chessboard here. what he's doing is he's going to ignore everything that doesn't benefit him in terms of his message. His message, if he wants to be president, is no new taxes. He's going to force his legislature to raise taxes. He's going to stand back and say, I didn't do it, look what I'm doing. It's his message. And regardless of the financial situation, what's playing out here, I think, is a political move that he's seen for probably 18 months down the road.
And on that point here, we're going to get into the politics for Chris Christie on the other side of this. I heard some fascinating conversations. I spent a couple days with the state legislature last week, and some of them swear this is exactly where Chris Christie wants to be here right now. He doesn't want to be at the front of the pack. He's more comfortable where he is. We'll get into that. And we're also going to ask you at home to weigh in. Head over to Facebook and Twitter and sound off on a question as it relates to public worker pensions. Do you think they are unsustainable, or are there promises that need to be kept? Now, when we come back, we'll step away from the pensions and dive into the polls. Some lowest poll numbers that this governor on your screen has ever had since he's been in office. We'll talk about that and his chances here in 2016.